Hello and welcome to the webinar of the week. We've got a great one on deck this morning. Industry bright spots, real projects ahead. So I think this is going to be a really uplifting session, and we have a wonderful panel with us today. And I'd like to start off by thanking Port Houston for their sponsorship of this webinar. And I'd like to introduce their trade director, Dominic.
Thank you, Leslie, and good morning and good afternoon to you all. My name is Dominic, and I'm the Director of Trade Development for Port Houston. As the nation's busiest breakbulk port, we'd like to thank Leslie and her team for giving us an opportunity to update its members on the developments going on at Port Houston. Although our cargo volume has been impacted by the pandemic in the last 3 months, our public facilities continue to be busy, remain very busy, and with effective and efficient receipt of delivery of cargo for our customers during these unusual times. Our port community has been ultra resilient. They come to work each and every day to keep commerce flowing through Houston to service our region, our state, and our nation during this pandemic. I'd like to share some recent stats with you, statistics with you all. Port Houston's moved 3.5 million tons of cargo through our public facilities in May. Nearly 17.5 million tons year to date, which is about 5% down compared to last year. Our port-wide container volume year to date is at 1.2 million TEUs, which is about 1% increase over the same time frame last year, which is a bright spot considering the circumstances, I would say. This is pretty much what we expected, and we see little change in the next coming few months. Steel tonnage year to date continues to lag, but this downturn was not driven by COVID-19 per se, but it was more driven by oil production being down, along with tariff impacts of 232 tariff. Steel imports are right around 1 million metric tons year to date, which is unfortunately 45% down from last year at the same time. With temporary closure of auto manufacturing plants overseas, imports of vehicles, finished vehicles, have also been impacted. Port in Houston is actually in this movement of other breakbulk cargo, such as grain, aggregates, and other minerals, which are up 320,000 metric tons year to date. This is an increase of 20% compared to last year. Other bright spots that we have here at Port Houston, we're excited about announcing a new service provided by Koga Lines. That's going to be calling Trinidad and Guyana from our care terminal facilities. We're also planning for a growth project that fits with our strategic mission. The Sesco cement facility is almost complete. They tore down an 100-year-old warehouse and have since built new cement silos, and also have rebuilt wharf number 3. The other capital projects taking place at the turning basin terminals revolve around maintenance and repair of the existing facilities. It's pretty much business as usual at Port Houston, especially with Port Houston's highest priority infrastructure project, that is Project 11, the widening and deepening of the 52-mile Houston Channel. Progress on Project 11 continues at a rapid pace. The team recently moved the design across the 35% milestone. Port Houston is working with the Army Corps of Engineers in project team level details, such as developing ship simulations with Houston ship pilots, working with multiple industries in pipeline relocation and other issues. And many more steps are required to move into construction as far as dredging and widening and deepening of the ship channel, which we still anticipate to start in 2021. This project will provide for safe two-way navigation within the ship channel for all relative vessel sizes. So with that is my recap as far as the development going on at Port Houston. And I hope I've provided some valuable insight as far as what the Port of Houston is doing to sustain continue supply chain movement through Houston. Thank you again, Leslie. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much for that update, Dominic. We've seen lots of great photos on Instagram and other social media outlets with Port of Houston. Lots of stuff going on there. So thank you. Our next panelist is in the oil and gas industry. And we know there's a lot of not the most optimistic news in that sector. However, Lisa Haley from Nacero has a new technology and billions of dollars worth of projects in the pipeline. So that is definitely a bright spot in this country. And now I'd like to turn it over to Lisa. We cannot hear you. Wait, let's see if it's just a mute thing. No. No. Okay. Looks like we're having some technical difficulties with Lisa. So I hope that we can get this worked out and we'll circle back to her. So now here's our new technology number 2, again in the field of energy, in this case, nuclear power. I have Scott Bailey with us from NuScale. This is small modular reactors that are set to really revolutionize the nuclear energy industry. So, Scott, let's hear from you.
Well, thank you, Leslie. If I get a nod from Leslie, she'll be able to say that she can hear me okay.
Yes.
All right. So thank you for inviting us. As Leslie mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Supply Chain at NuScale Power. I've been with NuScale since January of 2011. Very happy to be invited here, and I do truly believe that the NuScale technology is an industry bright spot, and I think it's going to revolutionize the way energy is produced in the United States. So we're pretty happy about it. As I go through these slides, I will not go through all the points, but you will have an opportunity to see the slides after. I think there's going to be a place to download these, so I won't be going through all the slides. First, I'd like to mention that we are getting support from the U.S. government under a cost share award. So we'd like to give our acknowledgement to the Department of Energy for their long-time support. So a little bit about NuScale. We've been around, the concept for the NuScale Power design has been around for a very long time. In fact, it was originally born at Oregon State University in the early 2000s. And what has happened is that with 2 major events, we really accelerated the program. The first being in 2011 when Fluor Corporation became our primary investor, and also in 2013 when we got our first cost share grant from the United States government, from the Department of Energy. So we're well along in the what we call the design certification process, which is the nuclear process to get a licensed design. And by September of 2020, we will be completed with the technical review, and it will move on to what is known as rulemaking, so that people can actually utilize our design. So a little bit about the design without getting too technical. It's revolutionary from the perspective of the steam is made all inside of what we call the NuScale Power module. So all the nuclear components are in one package. This package is about 75 foot tall and about 15 to 18 feet in diameter. But everything happens in here, and one of the most unique things about what happens inside this reactor is that there are really no moving parts, and it relies on things like physics in order to safely shut down. So it does not rely on operator action. It does not rely on electricity, and it does not rely on having to bring extra water into the NuScale Power module, which is quite revolutionary, and it simplifies the entire process. And it's kind of a paradigm shift here in terms of how we do this. Our module is made in a factory and shipped to the site for installation, versus the existing nuclear power plants. You basically bring in the reactor and then you build the power plant around it. Our design is such that it's very focused on factory fabrication, which means we'll be very focused on the logistics side of the equation. And these, basically the standard design has 12 of these NuScale Power modules, and they're in a 7 million gallon pool of water, which you can see in the center picture of this slide. So basically you're looking at a cutaway view, so you can see 6 of the NuScale Power modules, and there's 6 on the other side. So I like to call this the mountain slide because this journey is like climbing a mountain, and it's not for the faint of heart. If you look at the left-hand side of this slide, you can see that between our investors and the U.S. government, we'll spend over $1.4 billion just to get the design in a state that's ready to manufacture from our supplier's perspective and ready to construct. So that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of money. So our first plant is expected to be in Idaho Falls, or just outside of Idaho Falls, at the Idaho National Labs DOE facility, and it's expected to be owned by Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems, which is a collection of municipal power kind of companies that work under a joint action agency known as UAMPS. Our current deployment schedule is that we're slated for commercial operation in 2027. And we have line of sight to several U.S. utilities that are very much interested in the NuScale design, but we also have a huge amount of support and interest from international communities. Everything from sovereign nations to utility companies in international locations. So this list here just shows a list of some of the MOUs that we currently have in place with various companies. So this will clearly be a global opportunity, and there'll be lots of opportunities to move stuff around both the U.S. and the world. One of the great features of the NuScale Power plant is that it does not need a very big plot of land. Basically, we need about 30 acres, which is typical for the coal plants that exist, particularly in the United States. And what's great about repurposing a coal site is you already have the grid infrastructure. You already have a lot of the access to water. You have those kinds of things. So it's a real great opportunity for the NuScale Power plant. A little bit about the logistics. As I mentioned, I'm going to focus a little bit on the NuScale Power module. And basically it has 7 pieces, right, that get assembled what we call near site. They don't have to be assembled exactly, on the site property. It can be somewhere close by and then transported. But we have to move all of these parts. And as you can see, there's some pretty heavy components that need to be moved. This is what we call our configuration 2, which is a little bit more complex, because we have a configuration 1 where we pre-assemble at the factory the top 2 components that you see there, into one very large piece. And this works very well if you have, kind of a barge slip to barge slip situation. So a barge slip at the factory and a barge slip at the site. However, the Idaho site is not very near water. So we will be using this configuration. So as you might expect, there's a lot of movement of equipment. And additionally, I'll talk a little bit about the balance of plant equipment. Is that equipment is a lot smaller. So the steam side of the plant is a lot smaller. We basically have 12 60 megawatt steam power plants, all in one. And so we have a lot of quantities, but we don't have huge size. Our steam turbines aren't that big, and so on. So this last picture that I have here just gives you an idea of the challenge that we're facing in terms of moving some of these heavy components. And we have multiple destinations. I've only highlighted the two that we already have entered contracts into. The other ones are just very likely locations for some of the components to come from. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to introduce the NuScale Power Plant design to you all, and look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, you bet, Scott. That is so interesting, and I'm so happy to see that you're getting so close to starting that first project. That is fantastic. I did want to tell our viewers that we will take questions at the end of these presentations. I see a couple up already, so please feel free to do that. And now we're going to circle back to Lisa and see if everything's okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh my gosh, yes, yes. And a cheer goes up.
All right. Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Leslie, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lisa Haley. I lead supply chain and logistics at Nacero. It's a new company. You may not have heard of it yet. But I got hooked on supply chain when I worked in manufacturing, and I was actually volunteered to be on a cross-functional valve team. I've been in supply chain ever since. I spent 14 years at Fluor. I was VP of supply chain at CB&I back in the day, and then Salisbury, and I joined Nacero a year ago. So I'm glad to be talking with you, and I'd love to hear your comments, because I think the logistics associated with Nacero's first project presents some really interesting challenges. So look forward to your input today. As I mentioned, Nacero is a new operating company. We're headquartered in Houston. It's amazing to be part of developing a new company for the first time. The only problem is there's no legacy anything to complain about, and if anything needs to be done, you pretty much know who has to do it. And what Nacero is doing is we are working right now on plans to own and operate our first of several plants to manufacture gasoline out of natural gas. So let me pull up my slides here. Can you all see my screen?
Here they go. Here they go.
Okay, great. The technology to make gasoline from natural gas is actually not new. It was developed during the gas crisis in the 70s. The game changer now, of course, is the shale gas boom in the US. We can make gasoline out of abundant, low-cost, domestic natural gas, displacing, in many cases, imported heavy crude. And in non-pandemic times, for every man, woman, and child in the US consumes 1.2 million gallons of gasoline a day. It's actually our #1 consumer product in the US. The process is natural gas to syngas to methanol to gasoline. And the first 2/3 of that is exactly what's used to make methanol in hundreds of facilities globally every day. And a plant with technology identical to ours, all the way to gasoline, is already running in full operation outside of the US. Here's the interesting bit. When you manufacture gasoline this way, there is no sulfur in the finished product. Without sulfur, the catalytic converter in your car can do what it's supposed to do. The result is reduced tailpipe emissions and ground level ozone. So we're currently in basic engineering, getting into feed for a plant that will nominally manufacture 35,000 barrels a day of cleaner gasoline. The project TIC is over $3 billion. Can you all still hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, Lisa, we can hear you all the way along. You're fine.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. I think she can no longer hear us.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, looks like we are having technical problems today. So we are going to move on at this time, and hopefully Lisa can wrap it up if she gets another connection. But let's move on to Paula Swain with the Export-Import Bank of the U.S., which since its reauthorization has been very, very busy and has some significant good news and a look into the future that will support millions, or we'll let Paula say that, but many, many American jobs.
I'm with the Export-Import Bank. EXIM, is, as we refer to it, is the official export credit agency of the U.S. government. We've been around for over 85 years. And if you're in the U.S. and you pay taxes, I work for you. That's the most important part. We are a free service. Our financing comes with fees, but to speak with anybody at EXIM Bank, we're free. There are a lot of us that have special backgrounds, special unique knowledge. I myself have been most of my career in the energy business, whether it be oil and gas or power projects. And that's why I'm lucky enough to be able to office and live in Houston, Texas. I'm the only transaction loan officer at the bank that is not in Washington, D.C. And as I like to tell everybody, I'm probably more productive because of that. The reason that I'm speaking with you today is that EXIM Bank's mission is to sustain and create new jobs through financing of U.S. exports. And we have two different kind of product lines. There's one for domestic exporters, which would include working capital and supply chain financing, as well as export credit insurance that covers foreign accounts receivable. And then there's also medium and long-term financing for foreign buyers. So if somebody is buying a GE aeroderivative fast power unit, say in Bangladesh, we could finance that GE export in Bangladesh. Now, why I think it's important to you is all the stuff that we finance, the big stuff, anything that's over $20 million in value, or if we support in the form of a direct loan, if it has to be floated, it has to be compliant with the Jones Act. And I'm sure all of you know what that means. That means it needs to be floated on a U.S. flagged vessel. So that's an important thing to know. And I'll tell you a little secret that not everybody has figured out. I'm not sharing anything that is top secret or confidential. But every large transaction that we support that's subject to environmental due diligence, and that would include all energy projects, which is where I spend most of my time, it's published on our environmental page of our website. So you can kind of track what's in-house at EXIM Bank by looking at our pending transactions, again, on our environmental page of our website. So that's a good tip. If anything, you learn what we're looking at. We're a small agency. We're only about 400 people. The bulk of staffing is in the Washington, D.C. Office, but we do have regional offices throughout the country. Those regional offices tend to be focused on medium and small companies and working with trade multipliers like regional banks, economic development organizations at a local level, as well as various trade associations. We support everybody, and I mentioned GE. I think for a while in the 70s and 80s, we were known as Boeing's bank because we support a lot of Boeing aircraft. But those large companies, whether it be GE or Boeing, also support their entire supply chain, which is made up of a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. The really bright spot for Ex-Im Bank, after a number of years without a board quorum, which meant we could not approve transactions over $20 million, we now have a board quorum. We got the board quorum about a year ago in May of 2019, which means we can move forward with larger transactions. And in fact, the first significant board action was on the Mozambique LNG transaction. It had originally been sponsored by Anadarko, which was later bought by Oxy, and Oxy sold that Africa asset to Total. So I refer to it as AOT, Anadarko, Oxy, Total. But anyway, we supported almost $5 billion of U.S. exports for that particular project. So right out of the gate, we went to a very large transaction that we've been working on for a number of years. So that's really good news. Since we had been offline for quite a while, I wouldn't say that Ex-Im Bank was rusty, but a lot of the banks and the larger exporters that we have worked with, they were a bit rusty on the ways of Ex-Im Bank. We now have lots and lots of telephone calls from banks that are pitching various projects, as well as hearing from foreign borrowers that we supported in the past, as well as getting projects pitched by the large EPC companies that are bidding on transactions. We were without a board quorum for about 4 years. And so during that period, a lot of the large EPCs were procuring from their European offices. But now we're back. They're looking at US content, and we are relevant again. So that's really good news. Because we were offline for so long, there's a bit of a lag. I think that we're going to see a significant increase in financing applications over the next 6 to 12 months. The average transaction can take anywhere from 2 to 6 months, sometimes even longer if it's really complex, large project financing. So I expect to see a lot more activity in the months to come, even as a result of COVID-19. And actually, because of COVID-19, we will probably see an increase in activity. Certainly, there's some sectors that have been hit. A lot of sponsors have delayed their FID decisions, but we are considered a lender of last resort, and where banks maybe aren't taking any additional oil and gas risk, we are still willing to do that. In all cases, we have to have a reasonable assurance of repayment, but we are very aware of market conditions and how important our support is right now. Also, as a fix to the COVID-19 situation, management is very concerned about what we can do to support liquidity in the marketplace. We have added new flexibilities to our domestic programs that support U.S. exporters, and that is working capital and supply chain financing. We have increased the amount of our guarantee to what we call delegated authority lenders. Those are domestic lenders that are able to support Ex-Im Bank transactions based upon a certain credit criteria. So we have increased the amount of the guarantee to those financial institutions. So that's a good thing. We've reduced fees as well. That's also a good thing. And we're allowing for certain extensions and waivers almost automatically for our export credit insurance. So those are things that we responded to very quickly when the full impact of COVID-19 was beginning to become very apparent. For our long and medium-term transactions, as we're financing foreign buyers, we can support pre-export payments. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that, but if anybody's interested, you can certainly contact me and I can explain it. We also are supporting bridge loan financing for up to a year for companies that maybe ordinarily would not seek Ex-Im Bank support, but because of liquidity issues in the market with their core commercial banks, they may need support for a year. So we can help with that. In addition, with the new, I say new administration because the folks at Ex-Im Bank with the Trump administration are relatively new to Ex-Im Bank because we had we didn't have the staff that we have today when we lacked the board quorum. But once that was fixed, we got our new chairman, Kimberly Reed, who's very dynamic and a real asset to this agency. And part of the Congress's reauthorization of Ex-Im Bank, which is now extended through the end of 2026, we have a new program, and it's a big label, right? We're the U.S. government, so we like big labels. It is China and Transformational Exports. So we are trying to compete more actively against China and the subsidies that the state gives to China. This particular program is focused on particular areas of the U.S. Export market. One is artificial intelligence. Another is biotechnology, wireless technology and 5G, quantum and high performance computing, renewable energy and energy storage, which has always been an area that we've put particular focus on, semiconductor and its manufacturing equipment, fintech or financial technologies, and another area that we've always supported, but there's special emphasis now, is water treatment and sanitation. So there's been a special team that's been developed here at Ex-Im Bank where they will develop expertise, particularly in artificial intelligence, because that's not something that we've ever specialized in, although we're the government, right? So some would say our intelligence isn't real, it's artificial to begin with. And I can't see the crowd, so I don't know if anybody got a chuckle out of that. It's hard to joke on these types of venues. So we've got greater focus on that. Again, we have a board quorum. We're receiving calls from exporters, foreign sponsors, and banks. So that's all really good news. We expect a lot more business in the months to come. And I gave you the secret for the day, how to find out what's in Ex-Im Bank so that hopefully you can contact them about their logistics needs. As you wouldn't be surprised, a lot of U.S. exporters complain about the Jones Act. And the reason they complain is that other countries don't have the same kind of shipping requirements that the Jones Act requires. But as I say, because I grew up in Houston, Texas, and spent a lot of time as a kid when my dad would go down to what I called the chip channel. He was an electrical contractor and did some work down there. And I would go with him as a child in the El Camino with my bag of penny candy, and we would go visit the chip channel. So I grew up around that, and I understand the value that all of that brings to the economy. But U.S. exporters do complain a bit about NERAD and the Jones Act. But I guess the point I'm trying to make that I'm not making is that the experience that I have seen is that if exporters understand this or foreign sponsors understand this, and we try to explain it to them early, but if they understand it early, it's not as expensive as they think it's going to be, right? If they wait to the very last minute and they've got to get something on a ship, well, it's going to cost them more. But they should understand that as they go about their business anyway. So prepare. Do the research, and you're going to find the costs are not out of reason. And in that, we also support additional U.S. jobs. So that's all I have to say. I'm happy to be invited to this, and hopefully my contact information can be distributed at some point. So if anybody has any questions, you can either call or ask me, or you can ask a question at the end. And I'm prepared to answer all questions except whether or not baseball will be back for the 2020 season. So thanks.
All right. Thank you, Paula. Lots of good information there. And as you said, we will be taking questions at the end, so feel free to type them in. Everybody's available, open, and willing. So I think we'll go on to our manufacturing representative on the panel. This is Jeromy Hofmeister from Vogt Power International. Jeromy, welcome.
Thank you, Leslie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Thank you. Fantastic. I'm really honored to be here, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to be part of the Breakbulk Bright Spot panel. I'd also like to take the opportunity to say thank you to so many of the people who are on the webinar today, who are in the daily grind of the logistics of getting equipment to and from place to place safely and overcoming all of the hurdles that you regularly do. It means so much to us, and we really do thank you. I think webinars like this are one of the bright spots of what we're going through in the pandemic. It would be great to be together for conferences and meetings, but I think we're getting better at webinars like this. So thanks again, Leslie, for all the work that you do to put this together. I'm joining today from Louisville, Kentucky, the home of Vogt Power, the Kentucky Derby, Muhammad Ali, and if you don't mind, I'll borrow a few Muhammad Ali quotes today, just as we go through my little piece of this webinar. And so here's the first one. A man who views the world the same at 50 as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. A man who views the world the same at 50 as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. And I'll get back to that in just a minute. I'm really proud to represent Vogt Power as the logistics manager for 140 years now. And in more than 40 countries, Vogt has delivered excellence in heat recovery steam generators, otherwise known as HRSGs, for the power generation industry. Henry Vogt founded his company in 1880 right here in Louisville, Kentucky, where we're still located today. So what is a heat recovery steam generator? Let me just say quickly for anyone who might not know. It's quite a bit like it sounds. We are in the power generation market, and we take the exhaust off a gas turbine, and we run it through a boiler, and we send it through to a steam turbine to generate additional power off of using just the same amount of natural gas. So it improves the efficiency of the power plant. We can also reduce emissions if that option is selected. And there's all kinds of bells and whistles and options, but in a nutshell, that's what it is. It's cleaner, it's more efficient power generation for our world, and that's something that we see as a bright spot as we go. So being a part of Vogt Power means seeing the world differently, and it has for a long time. And it means being a part of change. Since 1962, when Vogt produced the first HRSG, the world of power generation has changed. You can imagine in that day the dominance of coal power generation and what it is today. Actually, in the last couple of years, natural gas has overtaken coal as the industry leader for power generation in the United States. This change was driven by lower prices, lower gas prices, stricter regulation on coal plants, and a growing number of renewable power. And you might think of renewables as competing against combined cycle power generation, HRSG technology. We don't see it that way. We see it as HRSG technology and combined cycle power generation are a wonderful complement to renewable power generation because they can ramp up and ramp down for power generation when the renewable power generation might fluctuate. So that is one of the benefits of natural gas combined cycle power generation. You know, things are changing so much so since 1962 when coal was dominant all the way to today. One major power producer in the South since 2007 has reduced its reliance on coal power generation from 70% of its power mix all the way to just about 20% in less than 15 years. That's a major shift, a major shift. So we see the world is changing. But one thing that we've also seen in the last year here is that the demand for power is really diminished. It's dropped. And this could be as a bright spot. You know, one U.S. region reports that demand is down at least 6%, and that's attributable to manufacturing being halted due to the coronavirus That's attributable to people working from home. So the demand for power is down recently. And the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, forecasts about 6% less electricity demand for 2020 when compared to 2019. So as a nation, the forecast for power demand is down. But we don't see this as a dark spot, and here's the reason why. We see it as a bright spot. Because what we're seeing operators do is eliminate, if they have the option, they're eliminating coal in favor of renewables, in favor of combined cycle power generation. And so this for us is a bright spot. Many of the coal power producing plants are being taken offline if they were forecasted to do so in the coming years. And in some cases, they're being taken offline earlier. We're not seeing any slowdown in the projects that we are executing and that we have as a backlog. The combined cycle customers are going to continue to build plants. In fact, between now and 2050, the EIA projects that the demand for power is going to grow at about 50% worldwide. So the world is going to continue demanding power. We know the world is going to continue to demand cleaner power, more efficient power, and we think combined cycle is going to be a really big piece of that. So we see that as a bright spot. Even though demand is less, our customers, power plant operators, are choosing combined cycle and renewable power over some of the more costly and damaging emissions to our environment. So there you go. Something else that's on my mind, when I think about bright spots in this pandemic culture, is another, and here's another Muhammad Ali quote for you. It isn't the mountains ahead to climb that wear you out. It's the pebble in your shoe. I think that's a clever quote by Muhammad Ali. So often we see the mountain ahead and we think that we're never going to be able to reach the top. We see, for me as a logistics manager, I see port closures, I see shift reductions, I see people not being available, I see companies going out of business during a very turbulent market. And it seems like, I don't know if we're going to get through it. But so often it's not the mountain that you see, it's the pebble in your shoe that keeps you from reaching the top. So for me, removing that pebble out of my shoe so often means something like being ready for crisis management. So personally, and as a company, as a department, we're taking supply management, crisis management as a serious pebble in our shoe, if you will, that we need to get out of the way that's not going to keep us from reaching the top. So when we face a crisis, we're ready. We have a team established. The team has identified the key risks. We've talked about which ones are severe and likely, and we know how we're planning to manage those risks. So I see that for Vogt Power, and I see it as a potential bright spot for those who are on the call today. If a lot of people will call a crisis management plan a business continuity plan. If you don't know if your company has one of those, I would suggest you ask. I think it's one thing you can do to improve during a tough time. So hey, I think you can choose to see the challenges that you face as a bright spot, an opportunity to remove that pebble. And that kind of leads me to my last of my Muhammad Ali quotes that I'll include. Don't count the days, but make the days count. And that's something that I hold on to. It's really easy to sit back and feel miserable and feel disappointed and feel discouraged and say, how many days is this going to last? But I hope, and this is something that we're doing at Vogt Power, we're not counting the days until we're going to be through this. We're trying to make every day count, and I hope that's something that can encourage you as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeromy. It's very inspiring. We are going to try Lisa again. Let's go, Lisa. Fingers crossed.
All right, we can do this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And can you see the screen?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, I
Oh my God, now she's on mute.
cost is just over $3 billion. And I mentioned logistic challenges with this project. And as you can see from the slides, you might be starting to get an idea of what's a little bit different. Our first target market for gasoline is Arizona, where there is currently no in-state production of gasoline and frankly, a pretty fragile supply chain from other states. They really need a local source of affordable and cleaner gasoline. So Casa Grande in the middle of this screen is where our first facility will be built. It's halfway between Phoenix and Tucson in one of the fastest growing counties in the US, and actually with access to all 6 million consumers between both Phoenix and Tucson. Our project will be one of the largest projects ever undertaken in Arizona, and certainly the largest of anything in the process industry in Arizona. We're going to bring some very high wage jobs to an area that has been designated as an opportunity zone. So it is an ideal location for the markets we want to sell into. Our site is relatively flat, dry, stable soils. We've got 1,000 acres. It's 1,360 feet above sea level. We've got great access to natural gas feedstock via 3 natural gas pipelines. We're 8 miles from both I-8 and I-10. We're on a Union Pacific rail line, which is great for shipping gasoline out to market. That's the diagonal that follows the Maricopa-Casa Grande Highway, starting about the middle on the left side of this rendering and heading up diagonally towards the right. You can see we have a lot of tanks. That's because of the process where you have to make methanol first and then blend, of course, with ethanol and so on for summer and winter grades of gasoline. And then in the middle there, we have 2 identical trains. We're also planning a solar farm, which is going to be on the bottom left of our site, which is bottom left of this rendering. Incidentally, we have some interesting high-tech neighbors in the transportation space, very, very close to our site. One is Lucid Motors, that is going to build luxury electric cars, $100,000 and up. They've already broken ground just a couple miles from us. And Nikola, which is hydrogen-powered trucks. And they're also building a new assembly plant nearby. So as logistics professionals, you've probably already noticed our challenge. It seems like with one notable exception, almost every recent energy project on this scale has been sited on the Gulf Coast with convenient water access. And the project execution plan is to barge in complete modules to the greatest extent possible. We've got that same scale, but without the water. I took a look at our major equipment list and added up the weights. It's over 13,000 static, straight tons of static and rotating equipment. All of this is going to have to be trucked to site, along with just under 20,000 tons of fabricated structural steel. We've already commissioned a couple of desktop transportation studies and looked at multiple options and import locations. Mammoth did a study for us a couple of years ago, and more recently, Fluor, Bill Keys and Cody Esser performed a desktop study for us with input from Mammoth and Bernhard and Berard. And thanks to their good work, we know that we can get everything to site here. For the folks that are really into this stuff, here's our likely routes. Number 1 is coming into the Port of Long Beach with a 566 mile route of interstate and local highways, and of course secondary roads with multiple overhead obstacles and overhead power and overpasses, of course. Could be remediated to some extent, but our shipping envelope was 80 foot long by 19 foot wide by 15 foot high. All of these routes have a weight limit of 160 straight tons, but that shipping envelope on length was a killer for the West Coast, because we have equipment that's in excess of 100 feet long. Also, and I think very creatively, we've considered Puerto Penasco in Mexico, even shorter route distance here, under 500 miles. The team identified obstacles as including offloading dock needs civil work done. I thought that was possibly the world's greatest understatement, because there currently is no offloading dock, and when we're done, there will once again need to be no offloading dock. All the other really typical obstacles that you would find, but the infrastructure having to be in Mexico makes that one probably a little bit too interesting. And then here's where we're at. And Dominic, I know you're still on the line, and I'm sure I'm glad and very grateful for Port Houston. We think very likely this will be our route: U.S. Gulf Coast, Port Houston, Corpus Christi, and Freeport. It's twice as long. It's over 1,000 miles. Has the overhead obstacles and things that'll have to be mitigated. But there's nothing that remediation can't take care of, and our shipping envelope is 200 feet long, 24 foot wide, and 20 feet high. Overall, very, very advantage for us, and looks like a likely route for us for sure. I'll end by saying that Costa Ground won't provide Nacero's only logistics challenge. We are actually planning to build multiple identical facilities with the same trains, as identical as possible, over the next 10 years in basin, where the feedstock is and where there are good nearby markets for gasoline. So we will be looking for ways to deliver the same equipment and materials to several of these locations in many of the shale plays shown here, with possible exception of the Bakken. Thanks again, and I'll look forward to your questions and comments.
Lisa, that is interesting information. I'm sure that wheels are turning out there with all of our logistics and transport viewers. And Dominic, you got a piece of good news. All right, that's great. Okay, so I think we have time, let's see, for a couple of questions. And I think there's one here that applies to most of you. What is your vendor vetting process, or how can transport logistics provider connect with you and then apply to be, considered for work? Let's start with you, Scott. You've been sitting there a long time.
Yeah, so I should have mentioned this. So, but the supply chain is split up between NuScale and Fluor. So Fluor has the majority of the quantities, if you will, and all the balance of plant equipment. So you can access them if you may already have relationships with Fluor, but through their supplier portal, as well as NuScale. We have on our website, NuScalePower.com. We have a supplier portal where it allows people to register, allows people to download their brochures and their things, so that when we're out looking for various suppliers, this is one of the places we look.
Great, Jerry, what about you?
Did you say me, Leslie? I'm sorry.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so our vendor qualification process is probably similar to a lot of others. We don't have a portal where suppliers can go to register to be qualified, but we do so kind of on an as-needed basis, and suppliers will reach out to us often about hoping to do business, and we look for opportunities that could turn into something real, and then we would start down that road of qualifying, and we would look at the competency and the financials, make sure they're financially strong, and make sure that they have good references in the industry, and a lot like the others, I suppose.
Okay, Lisa.
Yes, and anyone can go to Nacero.co, our website, and register their interest with us there. I've been tracking this for two purposes. One is, of course, in our role as owner and operator for maintenance and operations type of support. And also, as soon as we start FEED, which will be at the beginning of fourth quarter this year, I will share all of this information as part of our process with our EPC contractor to mutually agree on bidders and suppliers going forward.
Okay, all right, let's see, I've got a question for Scott. You mentioned that this plant could be used to replace a coal power plant. Since we are just having one technical issue after another today, I apologize. Since many of the coal plants are somewhat close to population centers, can you still put a power plant there with the challenges associated with required emergency planning zone for a nuclear plant?
So there's kind of two questions buried in there, but one of them is I'll just describe that the NuScale plant is so safe that it can be put in a population center, and the emergency planning zone is the site boundary, and that's following existing regulations and so on. So it can be put pretty much anywhere where you got 30 acres. And I think the second question was around how we're competing with renewables and so on. As Jeromy mentioned, load following is a very key attribute, and our plant is very capable of load following using multiple methods, everything from dumping steam, control rod control, as well as you can take 60 megawatts offline anytime you want, meaning that because we get 12 60 megawatt units, so it works very nice in the grid, and it's not overpowering like one of the large plants, for instance, in the southeast. We don't require any grid changes as well.
Okay. All right, let's see. We're getting close to the end. But I've got a couple of viewers who are asking about projects in the Middle East. Anybody have something or thoughts about that? I'm kind of know from these guys, but we do know that I know Etihad Rail project just got approved, and there's a number of things going on over there. So any last thoughts from our panelists? Any bits of one more, bit of encouragement for viewers? How about you, Dominic, our sponsor?
Well, thank you so much, Leslie. I mean, this is great. I mean, during this time of pandemic, we all have to act differently and conduct ourselves differently. But there's so much positivity as far as projects going on and how each individual organization is dealing with these many challenges. It's great to see, and that our industry overall in Houston will be thriving for years to come. And this is a very, very positive thing that I'm looking at from this particular webinar. So thank you for putting everybody together, the panelists, etc. And we look forward to seeing everybody in Houston in October for Breakbulk Americas. So hopefully we can engage each other then as well, and maybe even before that. But thank you so much, Leslie and your team.
Oh, well, thank you, Dominic. And I'm glad that you brought that up. Breakbulk Americas has now been scheduled for November 3rd through 5th in Houston at the GRB. And again, of course, Port Houston is our host port. So we look forward to welcoming everyone there. This fall, registration is open. And we've rolled back rates. So if you're planning on going, now's a great time to get your pass. Next week, we've got Women in Breakbulk on Leadership in the Americas. So that's going to be a good one a week from today. And then really interesting Breakbulk One show next Thursday on engineering innovation. I'm really looking forward to that one. It's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, panelists. You've given, I think, a lot of inspiration and a feeling of optimism to everyone. So thank you, and stay safe. We'll see you soon.
Thank you to all participants. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.